The more I can teach people to do this, the more it's going to increase the awareness of the need for preservation of these dark skies. When you fall in love with this genre of photography, you fall in love with the night sky, and you want to keep it that way.
Welcome to Big Red Canoe, the podcast from Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness, where we introduce you to captivating people and intriguing stories from America's treasured wilderness. I'm Dave Meyer. Grab a paddle and hop on in. So today's program is part of Boreal Stargazing Week, which is the celebration of Minnesota's dark sky parks, Voyageurs National Park, and the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. And this special week features free community and education events across Minnesota and online, bringing people together from all over the country to appreciate and protect our night skies. So this year's theme is Dark Skies and Nocturnal Animals, and it highlights how natural darkness benefits us all. Dark skies improve human health by supporting restful sleep and natural rhythms, protect wildlife behaviors like migration and reproduction, and reduce energy waste. They also connect us to indigenous cultural traditions and draw visitors from around the world to experience their beauty. So here in Minnesota, we're fortunate to have more acreage of pristine dark sky than the rest of the eastern United States combined. Voyageurs National Park, the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, and Quetico Provincial Park combine to create one of the largest dark sky regions in the world and offer an extraordinary opportunity to connect with the wonders above. Boreal Stargazing Week is made possible by Voyageurs Conservancy, Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness, Starry Skies North, Voyageurs National Park, Superior National Forest, Expeditions in Education, the Bell Museum, among other partners. That is a big bunch of partners, and it's been great to get everybody on the same page around this and talk about our dark skies. Today, we're going to look at what's possible when we step away from city lights and into the wilderness to photograph the night sky. Minnesota is particularly special for night sky photography, offering opportunities to capture the aurora borealis, and with two dark sky sanctuaries, the Boundary Waters and Voyageurs National Park, it provides some of the clearest, most pristine dark skies in North America. And I'm excited to be joined on the podcast today by photographer Marc Rassel, whose Milky Way photography has been featured in renowned publications and national juried shows across the United States. So whether you're just getting started with night photography or you're looking to refine your technique, Marc should have a few insights from time spent chasing dark skies. So thanks for joining us today, Marc.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dave.
So in addition to astrophotographer, you've also described yourself as a space nerd. What does that mean exactly?
Simply, it just means if it involves space, I'm interested. I mean, I love the stars, constellations, planets, nebulae, galaxies, scientific missions, you name it. Admittedly, some of the math and theoretical physics, all that stuff gets a little bit above my pay grade. If the math looks like hieroglyphics, that's not for me. But, I just love learning about it, following along the new discoveries, and honestly getting lost in just the contemplation of really how little we know about all of it.
How does that feed into your photography?
It informs it in a lot of ways, because I think this is a genre or a category of photography that is really highly technical in a lot of ways. So having that interest in the science behind things, I think, really helps with it. But just the same, like I mentioned, getting lost in that contemplation, I mean, that's one of the things that I love about astrophotography specifically, is just being out in the wilderness at night, often alone, and just staring up at the sky and letting the mind wander.
And where do you like to do that? What are some of your favorite locations? I described kind of what Minnesota has to offer. Is it Minnesota? Is it further afield? Like, what do you like?
Yeah, so I mean, regionally, locally, we're talking about the North Shore. The northern part of Minnesota has just phenomenally dark skies and huge expanses of it. Wide, varied terrain, varied weather conditions, all that is excellent. Globally, I mean, Iceland, Canada, Costa Rica, you name it. There's so many places to explore out there. We can touch on some of it a little bit later, I'm sure, but a little teaser, one of them that stands out in memory for sure is atop the mountain of Haleakala in Hawaii is like none other.
Oh, yeah, because you're out there.
Oh, it's as dark as it gets.
We have here in Minnesota dark sky sanctuaries or reduced light pollution. What's unique about that?
Well, for one, I'd go to say most people in the world don't get to see skies like that. I mean, you can basically draw a line straight down the Mississippi, and anything west of that is really quite special to us. But what we have in northern Minnesota is some of the darkest skies in the country, if not, competing for dark skies amongst the planet. And, from a photography perspective, it just allows more visibility into the objects that are in the night sky. You get more contrast, you get more color, you see more, and just the experience itself is unbeatable. I mean, sometimes it's even hard to pick out the constellations when you're in an area like that because there's just so many stars in the sky that you don't see in today's normal environments.
Right. Well, that's why I think of like a Milky Way shot with a Boundary Waters background as being something that you see a lot, just because it's the number and abundance, sometimes more than the objects themselves. Is there a different approach when you photograph in areas with truly dark skies versus light polluted areas?
To a degree, yeah. I mean, in short, the differences are it's easier. Um, you don't need the best lens, you don't need the best camera. You just have more visibility on these things that are out there, and in a lot of ways, it's more beginner friendly, save for the absolute darkness of being in the wilderness. That's another topic. But from the photography perspective, it just opens the door to so many more opportunities.
Yeah, well, what kind of approach could a beginner take if they're wanting to just get into this, get out there, and get some neat shots? Can they even do that with their camera phone?
Yeah, and that's a cool thing nowadays. A lot of newer camera phones. I mean, it's still limited technology, but a lot of the newer phones, particularly if it has a night mode on it. I mean, you can even get images of the Milky Way in a dark area like this by hand holding the phone in that mode. Now, I'd recommend at least putting it on a tripod or a rock or something stable. Try to get 30 seconds out of it. Just a cell phone alone is going to take some phenomenal images and show you what's out there when you're in an environment like this. And I think, to me, that's one of the great things is it allows pretty much anybody to start down this path to see what's possible. And I tell you what, when the first time you see a celestial object like that show up on the back of your screen, I'm biased, of course, but it's exciting. It changes things. It really motivates you to want more.
Sticking with the phones here and kind of beginner level, what do phones offer in terms of photography? I feel like when I'm out there, sometimes I notice that there's like probably an anti-shake mechanism, and I've noticed that the aurora seem to show up a little bit better than they do with the naked eye.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, especially if we're talking about aurora, which is, inherently a lot brighter than just the night sky itself. Cell phones are a phenomenal tool for that. I mean, to be honest, I use a cell phone half the time if I'm out aurora chasing, just as a way to hold that up to the sky and see, like, is that a faint glow forming? And when you look through a phone, the colors and everything is just so much more vivid than we can see with the naked eye. So, basic shots on a simple camera phone for aurora is unbelievable nowadays.
Yeah, I'll just use my phone if I'm looking at the sky and saying like, "Is that aurora?" I'm not quite
Yep,
sure, and
exactly.
then all of a sudden the phone, you look at it and it's like, "Oh yeah,
Oh yeah.
that's what I'm seeing here." So right now it's winter, and we're actually celebrating a kind of an educational gathering of different nonprofit organizations, and we're calling it Boreal Stargazing Week. And that is just a celebration of the night skies here and a way that we're able to with other organizations to bring it into classrooms. And so we're celebrating the dark skies, we're celebrating winter. And I'm just wondering, for you, does winter help with the photography? Are there specific attributes of winter that are good for night skies? And then, ideally, what weather conditions do you look for when you're planning a night sky shoot?
Yeah, so it means a number of things here. I'll kind of try to break this down a little bit from the different pieces of that question. What do I look for in night conditions for night sky photography? Simply, it's a lack of clouds. If it's clear to partly cloudy, that's a go mission for me. And the beauty of winter, especially in our region, which is typically just blanketed in clouds until spring and summer arrives. But when we get these nice cold snaps like this, typically that will mean clear skies. So despite the fact that you've got to tolerate those conditions, it's usually excellent sky conditions when it's cold like that. And the other thing that I think is worth noting with winter, particularly in the northern hemisphere here, is the objects that are in the sky, that are visible in the sky, including the Milky Way and some various nebulae, are vastly different than what we see in the summer. So it's a whole new opportunity to witness and photograph things that aren't the common ones as much. We don't see the core of the Milky Way in the wintertime where we are, but we get to see Orion, for example, standing huge and bright, right star of the show with the nebula, the stars that make up the constellation, everything about that is an excellent subject, even for beginners in some of this stuff. It's a little bit more challenging to photograph something like that, being that it's a bit more dim compared to, say, the Milky Way core. But again, when you see that nebula show up on the back of your camera for the first time, it's exciting.
So do you try to time your shoots with certain celestial events and things that might be visible? Do you have like a checklist?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, the more you do this stuff, the more you learn about things, the more you start to see the patterns of where things are. Like I said, Orion rising in the winter is kind of a marker for a lot of things. You can look to the north band of the Milky Way is another one. There's lots and lots of nebulae inside of that can bring out these beautiful red colors in some images. But to your question, timing that out, yeah, it's, there's a bunch of apps out there nowadays that can help you look and plan for these things. And while it can be challenging at first, knowing that all of these objects in the night sky are moving and changing and transitioning with the seasons, it's also incredibly predictable. It's periodic. So once you get a grasp on that, you can kind of go anywhere ahead of time and know, especially utilizing some of these apps, that'll give you a little preview on your phone. You'll be able to go in the daylight, look at a spot, look at that, say, okay, the north band of the Milky Way is going to line up here at this time. That's where I know I need to be and I want to be. So it's really quite cool that we have these tools nowadays to help with that.
What kind of things do you need to prepare for an overnight shoot? When you're getting out there a little bit further from the city lights, are there things that you need to stay safe, stay warm? What kind of stuff do you feel like you have to have with you?
Yeah, so I mean, aside from, the basics of your cold weather clothing, your camera gear, things like that, I always recommend, especially when we're dealing with cold temperatures like this, I'll always have in my pack a couple of things. Coffee, that's just, for
Right.
mental health, if nothing else.
Right. You got to stay up.
But no, in all seriousness, I'll always have a small first aid kit with me just in case. I'll have a space blanket, again, just in case to keep warm, spend a night if need be. Always be aware of how far you are from a vehicle, even if the vehicle can't start. That's a big deal to have some shelter if need be. So you want to have plans to be able to get back to that. But for me, the most important thing, especially when I'm out solo, is carrying a GPS signaling device like a Garmin InReach. I carry an InReach Mini that, literally at the push of a button, search and rescue can be communicated with if necessary. And I think that's very critical to just be aware of that. In addition to some of the basics of, letting somebody else know your plans, your travel plans, where you'll be and when you'll be in communication, so that if that does not happen, they know something's probably wrong and to send help.
Have you ever gotten in a sticky situation?
Not too bad personally, no. I mean, there's been some moments where weather has changed, things have changed from plans, but with their proper preparation and planning, there hasn't been anything that's been too terrible.
As far as photography goes, what gear do you usually pack?
So I'll pack way too much stuff, to be honest, but what's necessary? I mean, camera, lens, tripod, that's the minimum. If you're going to take things a little bit further, I'll always have a chemical hand warmer, those little air activated ones in my pocket, and a rubber band, which might sound a little bit silly, but when we're dealing with these cold temperatures, we run the risk, if there's enough humidity, of getting frost on the lens throughout the night. But simply putting that hand warmer around the lens, hold it on with a rubber band, it'll keep it warm enough to keep the frost off. That's easy. And then beyond that, I just try to think in terms of comfort. If I'm going to be out in the wilderness somewhere and I'm doing a long shoot, spending a couple hours with this, bring a nice warm coat, something to sit on in the snow, some coffee, hot chocolate, whatever, snacks, to just make my own little comfort zone, right? To hang out in and just enjoy the night.
Do you try to stay by the car? Do you snowshoe? Like, how do you get to a location?
Yeah, it depends on where I'm shooting. I mean, I think shooting and weather, when we're dealing with these temperatures, when it's hitting -20, -25, I'll try to stay near the car. I don't think there's any reason for unnecessary risk with that. And quite honestly, it can get kind of miserable if you're too far out from that. But if the weather's a little bit more favorable, yeah, I mean, hiking, snowshoeing, whatever it takes to get to it, it's just always balancing this risk reward, right? If I'm just going for a simple image, a nice night out, there's no reason to go super far out and increase the risk too high.
Just have a pack that kind of fits everything.
Oh yeah, nice big backpack. Fully loaded, it's probably 40, 50 pounds at times with all of the camera gear, but that's excessive. I bring too many lenses, too many cameras, too many of everything. But yeah, I mean, it's just try to get it all in one pack and it's all there with you.
Do you have a certain kind of lighting that you would take with you so that like I'm thinking of a red light or something so your eyes don't get washed out by a bright LED or
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I'm glad you bring that up because I think that's worth talking about. It's lighting is an area of a bunch of concern, and often people just don't know some of the stuff, be it etiquette or consequences and so on. So yeah, you're right. As you said, a red light is very important for moving around. Typically, once I'm to a location is when I'll start to use the red light. Hiking with just the red light, especially if there's no one else around, is again just a slightly increased risk that I might step on something wrong, twist an ankle, whatever. So I'll use white light for that. But when you get to location and use the red, it helps, keep your eyes to adjust to the dark. If there are others around, it's less interfering to them. And also, there's the whole topic of supplemental lighting and unnatural lighting when you're out in these spaces, and that in itself is a big discussion. But that extra white light can have an effect on other people, other animals, other ecosystems that are out there that we might not even be aware of. So it's a big thing, and at the risk of getting a little too far off topic, I mean, there's a growing movement, I'll say, in limiting some of that. For example, Arches National Park a few years back has banned any and all supplemental lighting overnight. So like a photographer like me, that's one technique we often use what's called low-level landscape lighting, where we'll shine very dim light onto the subjects to just, help control the look of that. But that's not allowed. They found it starts to affect different ecosystems out there, and it's just not okay.
I'm becoming aware a little bit more of some leave no trace ideas of people traveling to the boundary waters. And just like when I'm on a canoe trip, for example, in the summer, I try to limit the amount of sound or the level of speaking so that I'm not disturbing people who might be right across the lake from me because sound travels. And I think light is similar. If you had a campsite nearby you that's just shining a huge light, they might be impacting your experience and the impacting the experience of the wilderness around them as well. So I think that that's something that we can and should become more aware of to minimize.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, in conservation, from the perspective of controlling light pollution, we speak in terms of light trespass, and that's exactly what you're talking about. It's thinking of these things as light as an object that is trespassing into somebody else's wilderness experience, and we just need to be mindful of that.
But at the same time, you're talking about, sometimes you want to use a little bit of lighting for composition. I'm just kind of thinking of the trees up against the what might be the night sky, and so how do you approach composition, and then how do you use lighting subtly within that?
Sure. So there's a couple things in that. I used to personally, I've gotten away from it since, use a technique called light painting, where you can shine a bright flashlight or a headlamp across these distances and take a longer exposure to get the detail of, like you said, the far trees over a lake, right? I've since backed away from that because I find it too intrusive. I mean, the light you need for that is so bright for this, and you may not know what's out there beyond that. So alternatively, it takes a little bit more effort in editing in Photoshop, but you can just do a much, much longer exposure. I mean, sometimes upwards of 10, 12 minutes if it's really dark to get the detail in these trees, in those distant objects, and then take your exposures for the sky or closer foreground elements and blend that all together. That's completely unintrusive to do it that way. Alternatively, like I said, there's a method called low-level landscape lighting, where you take a small light, actually got one here, kind of like this. That's just a diffused little portable light for those that are looking at the video of this.
Yeah.
And essentially the idea is that you match the brightness of that light to the brightness of the starlight, which you can imagine is pretty minimal. So for most people, animals, passerbys, they're not even going to notice that this is out there, but the camera will pick that up. So I'll still utilize that technique in a lot of compositions. But for the most part, I just try to work with the light that's out there, which is typically a partial moon or starlight alone.
How do you use that? Speaking of that light that you use, how do you get it to match the starlight? What's that process, or is it just kind of a feel, kind of a
Yeah, I mean
dialing it
it's
in? And
trial and error and experience, to be honest.
uh-huh,
It's
uh-huh.
I kind of know from doing it enough where to set this, but for the most part, it's make it about as dim as it can possibly get as a starting point, and take your photo and just look at it. And you can kind of gauge if something's too bright or too hot. You either need to adjust the light or move it to a different position.
What else are you looking for, as far as trees or things like that, that in your experience make for a good night sky photograph?
Oh, that's a big question, Dave. So there's a lot of things that can make great composition, great night photographs, but for something that I often suggest, especially for some beginners getting into this,
Yeah.
is to look for what we call leading lines. It's going to be elements that form either a literal or an implied line that extend into the image. And that's going to guide the viewer into that. It's going to create this sense of depth. Often, in the case of a Milky Way photo, we'll try to get that line to line up with where the core of that Milky Way is coming. So it just pulls you straight into that subject. And again, for those that might be watching this on a video here, if I could, I'll share an image here of exactly that concept. So in this one, this was up in Scenic State Park. You can see these lily pads here kind of form a nice texture in the foreground. They group together and bring you in to this sort of island of trees in the center of it, met right there with the Milky Way core as it extends up into the sky. So it creates that sense of depth into the image with really no more effort than looking around, moving around, and finding the position that will make this work.
Yeah, and so if I can describe it for our audio listeners, it's kind of like a sea of lily pads leading up to some trees, and it's all just kind of following, like you said, in a line, and it seems to kind of flow from different shapes to the next shape, and then into the light itself, into the sky. That's really cool, Mark. I love it.
Yeah, thank you. And then just another quick example of a similar idea, but really just utilizing the reflection of a lake to let the band of the Milky Way itself create that line into the image as an exact mirror image over the surface of a perfectly still lake, which, as we know, are abundant in our area.
Yeah, you can see the light here on the lake, even though it's dark enough, obviously, to see this bright Milky Way in the frame.
That's exactly right.
Wow. Impressive. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Of course.
Yeah, what are there any other landscape elements besides you've got trees and lakes, rocky outcroppings, I would imagine. Anything else that you like to feature?
Yeah, really, to me, it all comes down to exactly that of creating that sense of depth as the primary goal, right? And there's tons of ways we can do that. Again, I'll pull up a couple of visual examples for those looking at it. Some may be familiar with this. This is a view of the Tombolo here along the North Shore in northern Minnesota. And similarly, this is not it's not using leading lines that we talked about, but these foreground elements, there's rocks near the bottom of the frame here, right? That kind of anchor the image and let the center of it here, which is the island with a little bit of snow, which is brighter than the rest, kind of drawing your eye into that, and then complemented by the core of the Milky Way. And this is actually a great example, coming full circle back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, of how things change throughout the season. So this particular image was taken, I believe, at the end of May or early April. And at that time of year, the Milky Way core rises very, very late in the night or early in the morning, if you will, and is at a very steep angle like this. Whereas throughout the course of the summer, it's going to move both when it rises into earlier in the night. Its position in the sky will change, going from southeast to south to southwest throughout the summer and into fall. And the angle that we generally see it at will change pretty dramatically from this nice low angle we see in this image all the way up to near and just past vertical from our view here in the Northern Hemisphere.
Right, in terms of boundary waters, I feel like that's what I see a lot of is kind of a straight line up out of the lake. But now that you point that out, it's remarkable to see this photograph where it's a lot lower angle. It does complement really well with the island.
Yeah, so in a lot of ways, in terms of you're asking what makes a good image with this. It shares a lot of the same concepts with just general landscape photography, which, I mean, many of us around here are pretty familiar with that, given the landscapes that we have available to us. The difference is just mixing in these more dynamic elements of the night sky.
So how much is this planned, and then how much is it improv when you get to a location where you kind of take in what's around you, take in the light conditions of that particular day or night, and turn that into an image?
So for me, it's both. If I'm going to a location that I haven't been before, and photography is kind of a secondary thing to it, I'll just try to arrive in the daytime, look around, find some interesting things, use some of these apps like I had mentioned. Photo Pills specifically is a great one for anyone that wants to start exploring that. Um, but use some of these to figure out where things will be positioned from a particular location and decide if I'm going to come back at night for that. On the flip side, like that image I was just showing you there along the North Shore, that was highly planned. If because it was purposeful. I knew that this was going to be a multiple hour shoot. It was a very complicated photograph using a star tracker and a bunch of different techniques with this, that I don't want to mess that up, right? Like that's a big time commitment. It's not often we get perfectly clear skies for hours on end over Lake Superior. So the planning for something like that's very important to me. But I think that's part of the fun of this is we have so many tools available to us nowadays that I could perfectly plan this shoot and never leave my living room.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking with that one though. I mean, you probably have the plan in mind, but then are you just looking for the right weather?
That's exactly right. Yeah. I mean, some of these you can plan 6 months, a year and a half in advance. And then all it comes down to is the night before of what's the weather going to give us. And if the weather's not favorable, that's it. You've got to get used to disappointment in this field.
Do you have any memorable stories about any photographs that you've captured where something revealed itself?
So yeah, there's two stories that often stand out. The first is a little bit short, and I'll share that quickly. It's kind of moderately embarrassing, to be honest, that it took this many years in life to learn the specific behavior of a beaver. So I was along a riverway, a small little pooling of water a while back and in the summer, and shooting down there by myself, pitch black, can't see anything, right? And I hear a little bit of splashing and moving, and that's not unusual. It gets your attention, but it's nothing strange. And then I hear, the classic slap of a beaver tail. I'm like, oh, this is cool. There's a beaver out there. That's pretty neat. It's doing its thing off to the side. And the next thing I know, it sounds like somebody threw a bowling ball over my head into the water, that big karoosh sound, right? And the water splashes up, hits my face. I don't see any of this and had no idea that beavers make that big of a splash. So I just hightailed it out of there until I, told some friends the next day, and they're telling me exactly what that was and laughing at me, and we'll move away from the rest of that. Um,
Freaky though. I mean, if you're out there by yourself.
Oh, it can be, yeah. I mean, honestly, anytime you're out at night like this, it's an unknown sound from an animal like that. It's 100% certain this is your last day on Earth until you figure out what that animal is, right? But no, more seriously, one of my favorite stories of recent times, and I'll share an image with this that isn't necessary to those just listening. But this was an image taken up in Fairbanks, Alaska, during a really powerful auroral display. March of 2023 may stand out in some memory as it reached all the way down to Minnesota. I know that. But the story goes, I was hanging out in the hotel lobby the day of this and watching the space weather and realizing that tonight is absolutely going to be a phenomenal night, right? And so things are starting to get a little hectic. Everyone's stirring, and randomly this group of tourists happen to see some of the things we're working on and realize what we're doing. So they come ask some questions and mention that they had a tour booked for tomorrow night, and they're so excited. And long story short, I encourage them, just do whatever they can, change that to tonight. Get out tonight. It's going to be the big one. And so all pandemonium ensues in this poor hotel lobby with people calling and canceling and trying to find a tour guide and maybe just a taxi to drop them off in the middle of nowhere, whatever it takes. So long story short, they got the tour booked and everybody went on their way. We went out with a group. I mean, hours and hours and hours of stunning auroral displays, a great night of photography. Get a little bit of sleep in the morning. Next morning, I'm in the same lobby grabbing some coffee, trying to feel human again. and I hear this shriek behind me, and I'm like, "What is that?" I turn around and look, and it's one of the women from this group, and she's just running at me, arms wide open. Perfect stranger gives me the biggest hug and thanks me for this because to me that's what a lot of this is about is just getting people out to experience some of these things. And often photography is the vehicle for that. It's the excuse to get out and see the things that most people just never know of.
That's what we're all doing here. I think there's a solitude aspect, but there's also a big community aspect to it, and that's a lot of what we do in our work too. So how do you share that knowledge with other photographers?
I obviously I run workshops. I am happy to do speaking engagements, one-on-one communication, just random questions from strangers. I enjoy sharing the knowledge that I've gained from this. I think that there's no barrier. A lot of people will think, oh, you're giving away all the secrets and you're doing this and that and you're making it so everyone can compete. And it's to me, it's not a competition. And I mean, frankly, from that side, I could teach you every last detail of something, but the one thing I can't give you is experience, right? You're just going to have to go out and do it. So there's no harm in giving this. And to me, the more I can teach people to do this, the more it's going to get people out doing these things. And just by the nature of doing that, helping increase the awareness of the need for preservation of these dark skies. When you fall in love with this genre of photography, you fall in love with the night sky and you want to keep it that way.
If somebody's just wanting to get started, how can beginners get going with this? What might be the next step?
Honestly, YouTube. Go online, read some stuff, watch some videos, get some of the basics in place. If you have the resources, sign up for a workshop that's dedicated for teaching some of this stuff. But with a baseline knowledge of camera settings, how to plan your composition of where the Milky Way or whatever you're shooting is going to be, it's a matter of just getting out there and doing it. And my best piece of advice that I was given a while back, and it really stuck with me, is to just fail as fast as you possibly can. Get that part out of the way because it's a very technical genre, but just grab your gear, get out there, give it a shot, learn from your mistakes, and ultimately just enjoy a night under the stars. That's what it's all about.
What impact does light pollution have on your work, and what are the ways that people, as they get into this more, might be able to get engaged with that?
Sure. So, kind of two parts of that. The impact of it is pretty significant, and I've seen that. A lot of people talk in turn or ask questions of how has this progressed over your career of doing this. But let's narrow that window. Let's talk in terms of a 5-year transition. There's
Yeah.
one particular spot that comes to mind that's up along the North Shore where I've visited the spot many times and I've photographed there a number of times. It's nothing particularly amazing, but regardless, 5 years ago there was some light pollution. There's a little town below, right? You can see some of this stuff, and now I go back to the same spot, and comparing those two is dramatic. And the biggest change that I see is a little bit of growth in the amount of light, but honestly, it's the type of light that's changed so much. We've gotten away from some of the yellow, the incandescent, the high pressure sodium lights in favor of long lasting LEDs, right? And those LEDs are typically exceptionally bright and that powerful white, bluish colored light. And that's about the worst thing that we can do with this. Um, so that effect is happening all over the place. And what we can do about it is one, just get a little bit more informed on what's happening and what can be done. It can be as simple as putting a proper shield on a light to keep the light focused on the ground, to put a timer on a light that's only needed at certain times, or a motion detector for, say, a security light, right? That's important to have your sense of security, but it doesn't need to just be blasting all night long. And once you have some of these things, once you have seen some of those effects, truly it's a matter of conversation. That's what I've seen the most of. People just don't know. And as soon as they start to learn about some of this and the things that they themselves can do to help this, it's quite easy. And you see this aha moment pretty frequently. And I think that's the big thing. It's just spreading the word about some of these things. And, organizations like Friends of the Boundary Waters, Dark Sky International, Starry Skies North here locally are all great resources for learning about some of these things.
If photographers want to get involved in promoting this dark sky conservation, just get in touch with those organizations, find out, what some of the things are that people can be doing, spread the word?
Yeah, absolutely. Get involved with the organization. If you've got time to volunteer in any capacity, I mean, that's the best way to do it, is to just strengthen um, the efforts by numbers of consolidation and just get out there and make a difference. I mean, it's already happening. It's just a matter of growing that and spreading this.
When you're photographing and you encounter some of these, light pollution and things like that, are there ways that you can kind of work to counteract that in your photographs? Do you have to work extra hard? Can you do things in editing to eliminate that?
Yeah, to a degree, there's things we can do to counter it, but really, in a lot of ways, not so much anymore. And part of that, I'll go on a small tangent here. What I mentioned about the change in the color of the light, those yellow HPS, high pressure sodium lights, we used to be able to put a filter on the front of our lens and mostly filter that out, but you can't do that with the white LED. So the result is you just deal with it, to be honest. It becomes another element that you just have to work with in your composition if that's the case. I'll share another image while I speak of this again, just as an example. This is an image that was taken out in far western Colorado, far removed from any form of light pollution. For those that can't see it, it's a look down into a mountain valley from a high mountain pass with the Milky Way up rising high in the sky. We see the light of a car driving through this valley in a trail and quite a bit of glow from light pollution off in the distance. And there's almost nothing I can do about fixing this other than just work with it. Now, this is a very mild case of light pollution from a smaller community reflecting off of clouds, which is, makes everything appear brighter. But the worst effects of light pollution like this, if I'm near or in a larger city, I can't photograph the night sky. Period. Not without special filters and a bunch of different techniques, but like you see with the Milky Way here, it's just not going to happen. And that's,
Yep.
I mean, to me, that's one of the saddest things that there is we're just taking away that night sky when we don't have to.
Yeah. Yeah. I live in South Minneapolis myself, and I feel like I'm lucky to even see a few stars. But then when I'm near the Boundary Waters of Lake Superior or things like that, I appreciate them all the more. And so just taking those opportunities when we have them to go get out there and appreciate them. So if you heard there was going to be some kind of a celestial event, like how far would you go? Would you get in the car and do you get out there for a meteor shower or something like that?
Oh yeah, if the weather conditions look like they're going to cooperate, I'll go out to shoot a meteor shower, regularly chasing aurora just because I love that so much. But will I travel for an event like this? Will I drive 12 hours plus one way down to Illinois to watch and photograph a total solar eclipse, turn around and go right back home? Absolutely, I will. And I mean, to be honest, it's, again, a tangent there. If you have the opportunity to see a total solar eclipse and you have not put that on your list, make it happen. It is the single most mind-blowing celestial event that there is, in my opinion, of course.
And then, if it's cloudy, then what do you do? Go to the coffee shop?
Pretty much. Remember what I said earlier about
go to the movie?
Get used to disappointment if you're going to participate in this kind of hobby. And I mean that in all seriousness. It's just, that's the nature of it. You can't control the weather and it can change on a dime.
Well, and just like fishing, you're kind of going for something, and then if you don't get it, enjoy what's around you, and try to appreciate that, especially if you're getting out into into the woods a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, enjoy your time out there. That otherwise, why are we doing this?
So I've got a little speed round here of
All right.
questions. I'm trying to think of a name. I called it mosquito bites. So let's go with little questions here. The mosquito bites. What are your favorite celestial objects or events to photograph?
Yeah, total solar eclipse, hands down.
Okay.
To be more fair, for something with more frequency, it's aurora.
And what's the most challenging condition you've shot in?
Most challenging condition. Honestly, extreme light pollution. The one that comes to mind is just outside of Old Town in Dubrovnik, Croatia. Phenomenally dark over the sea across from there, but in that city is outrageous light pollution just spewing out of the old town.
What's your most essential piece of gear besides your camera?
Coffee. and tripod. No, realistically, it's a good tripod, keeping the things nice and stable and sturdy.
Dream location for night photography.
The Atacama Desert and the Alma Observatory
Atacama, where's that?
and Chile.
And Alma Observatory?
Right there inside, it's in the desert there at high
Oh.
elevation.
Oh, I see. Have you ever been there?
I have not. That's a bucket list item. We'll try to make it happen, but the observatory, they don't really let the public visit overnight, so that's unlikely to happen. But the Atacama Desert is easily accessible.
And what's the best location you've actually been for night photography?
I would say it's what I mentioned earlier, up on top of Haleakala in
That's
Hawaii.
right. You did mention
Yep.
that earlier.
I mean, I was there in June, and I mean, I froze my butt off overnight. I brought a puffer coat and everything too, but was still severely underdressed for those conditions, which you just don't think of in a place like Hawaii, right?
So, along those lines, what's the most common mistake beginners make with this type of photography?
Honestly, missing focus. It's more challenging than I think you'd realize to get these pinpoint stars in pinpoint focus.
What's a way that people can do that?
Practice. First and foremost is practice. There's various techniques. If your camera has the LCD screen that you can zoom in on a live view, absolutely do that. Make the stars as big as you can. And then you're just kind of rocking your focus ring on your lens back and forth. The star's going to get bigger and smaller as you do this, and you just want to try to get it as small as it can be. That's how you know it's in focus. Alternatively, I don't have one in front of me. There are filters you can put on the front of lenses now. It's kind of a version of what's called a Batinov mask, that when you have that on and you point your camera at a bright star, it makes these 3 distinct diffraction spikes that stick out from either side of the star. And as you're changing the focus, the one in the spike in the center will move in between sort of this V of the other two. And when it's dead center, you know that it's dead on in focus. So it takes a bit of that difficulty away utilizing something like that, especially if you've just graduated into bifocals like some of us.
Right, me too. Is there ever room for autofocus in this world?
Short answer, no. In night photography, don't do autofocus. There are some reasons why you may for focusing on the landscape in front of you, but as far as autofocus on stars, we're just not quite there yet.
What have you got in the future? What projects are you excited about?
Some of the biggest some of the things that have me most excited right now is spring of 2026. My wife and I are going to be doing a fair amount of travel, a bunch of it in the Southern Hemisphere. Exact locations, I don't know yet. Patagonia, Australia, probably some others along the way. But just seeing and shooting the Southern Hemisphere has me pretty excited. Everything's upside down and backwards. There's a couple nebulae that we just can't see in the Northern Hemisphere. So I'm pretty excited to see how that thing all develops.
Wrapping up here, how has night photography changed your perspective on nature and conservation?
I think what I'm about to say is going to sound more negative than I intend. But what I've found is it's really shown me in a lot of ways how insignificant we really are from a cosmic perspective, right? But at the exact same time, we are incredibly significant, and the actions that we do and the impacts that we have on a more micro scale are massive, right? Even the smallest little things. So just seeing how quickly humans have and can affect change with regard to light pollution specifically has made it like exceptionally clear to me just how easily we can have these major impacts on our environments, both positively and negatively. So obviously I try to focus more on the side of what can we do to positively affect change here. But, spending a lot of time just zoning out, looking at the stars and thinking about it, this is kind of where you land on things, that these micro scales really matter.
Well, thank you for that. I think people should zone out and focus on those things, and also
Absolutely.
get outside and give it a try. So, thank you, Marc, for joining us on this podcast today. Good luck with your work. Speaking of that, where can people find your work, and how can they connect with you?
Yeah. Well, again, thanks for having me. Best bet is to either find me on social medias, Facebook or Instagram at Marc Rassel Photo, or my website, marcrasselphoto.com, has all the information you could ever need to get a hold of me. And in all seriousness, if this is something of interest to you, feel free to drop me a question, a comment, or whatever. Just reach out. I'm happy to nerd out with anybody about these topics.
All right. Well, we'll provide the links in the show notes here,
Great.
and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's fun.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend and leave us a rating wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be covering a wide range of recreational topics this season, and we'll meet some great personalities from the BWCA along the way, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a thing. And to become a member and support the Friends, visit friends-bwca.org. Big Red Canoe is a presentation of Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness. Original music by Surge and the Swell. I'm Dave Meyer, and we'll see you next time on Big Red Canoe.
No copper sulfide mine has ever operated without polluting the surrounding water sources. It's the most polluting industry in the United States and an existential threat to the boundary waters. That's why Friends of the Boundary Waters is championing the Prove It First law. The Prove It First law is simple. Before a copper sulfide mine in Minnesota can be permitted, the Prove It First law would require independent scientific proof that just one copper sulfide mine has operated in the United States for at least 10 years without causing pollution, and that one mine has been closed for at least 10 years without polluting. Let's protect our clean water. Let's pass a Prove It First bill.